Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua, tuia ki ngā ngako o ngā tangata katoa, hia te menui ko te aroha e. Ka rere taku mihi tuatahi ki te atua, nāna nei ngā mea katoa I hanga. Te kororea te whakamoemiti ki ai I ngā wā katoa. Ka huri au ki te tuku mihi ki te mana whenua o tēnei rohi, ko Ngāti Pōneke, nā rātou I tia ki te whenua nei, no reira, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Ka huri au ki te tuku mihi ki a koe, te kai, Joe McGarry, te kai whakahaere o tēnei hui. Nā mātou te whiwhi ki te haere ki tēnei kaupapa, no reira, kei te mihi ki a koe. Ka huri au ki te minenga kua whakapiri mai nei, te hare me te koa ki te kite tēnei ropu e whai ana I te ara o ihu karaiti. Nō reira, ko wai au. Kia rere taku manutaki ki ronge ki te maunga te owhatireia ka peka I te wai pi ata. O te wai o Parirua e ripi ana te wakatai nui I te tāwhiti tātari ana te manu ki ronge ki te waharoa o tā kupu wahia. Hei tū te mo te iwi o toa rangatira e! Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. A little while ago, I was at a conference, a theological conference, in fact, examining certain aspects of the Anglican Church here in Aotearoa. It was over the course of 3 days, and there were a number of speakers from around the country. It was on that second day that I found myself in that hour of doom, the post-lunch, mid-afternoon siesta hour, where the warm air turns stuffy and the egg sandwiches start sitting heavily in your stomach, and you've already had 4 cups of tea, but you get up to get yourself a 5th one anyway, just to do something to stay awake. It was at that rather uninspired hour that I was struck by this realization that has stayed with me until today, and probably will stay with me for the rest of my life. Maybe, I hope. And that is that I could have been sitting anywhere in the world and listening to the same korero that I was listening to that day. I don't mean the topics, because the topics were focused on the Anglican Church here in this country. No, what captured me was, I guess, a lack of cultural specificity in the theological reflections that were coming out that day. So not the subject matter, but the way that the subject matter was treated, using Western frameworks and drawing from Western Christian tradition, attempting to speak to the Anglican Church here in Aotearoa. I say attempting because, as an Indigenous scholar, I find it difficult to see how theological reflections drawn mostly from this kind of Western cultural hegemony can adequately speak to my experience or offer insight into my reality without dishonoring, subsuming, silencing, or simply ignoring the ways that my own culture might engage with it. Now, I've seen this at plenty of other conferences. My previous field was English literature, but this was a conference focusing on the Three Tikanga Church of Aotearoa. And for those of you in the audience who aren't aware, the Anglican Church is split into 3 cultural groupings: Tikanga Māori, Tikanga Pacifica, and Tikanga Pākehā. So any meaningful examination of the Anglican Church here needs to comprehend that cultural diversity. What I realized from that conference was 2 things. Firstly, that many theologians are unaware of the effect that speaking from that Western cultural hegemony has on Indigenous or other viewpoints. And the second one is, if you did have a theologian that understood that, I saw that they felt unable to speak across to other cultural contexts or tikanga. Black theologian at Yale University, Willie Jennings, offers quite an excellent analysis on the importance of the church understanding the way it can perpetuate these homogenic theologies. So he offers this, he maps the shifts and the traumas that Indigenous ways of relating receive during the colonial moment via three modes, actioned by the merchant, the soldier, and the missionary. So the economic imperative of the missionary and the power-shifting enterprise of the soldier set in place new ways of relating between the land, Indigenous, and settlers. Sitting alongside that is the missionary mode, which is marked by the fear of encounter, says Jennings. So his position is that when the missionary mode looks at what is unfamiliar, what is alien, and attempts to transform it into the familiar. These new ways of relating are at direct odds with Māori Indigenous ways of thinking of relatedness and relationship. Our first Māori systematic theologian, Menary has a rendering of Māori identity as this deeply relational thing, atua, whenua, tangata. That's God, land, and humanity in deep relationship with each other. I'm going to read a quote from him. I didn't want to memorize it. I didn't want to risk getting this one wrong. So Menary states, in Māori consciousness, these three sets of relationship constitute who we are. They are not reducible to one or two sets, and they are dynamically interrelated in the following sense. If one enhances one's relationship with atua, also enhanced will be one's relationship with tangata and with whenua. If one's relationship with atua is diminished, one's relationship with tangata and whenua is likewise negatively affected. Perhaps by now you're getting the picture of how deeply relational the Māori worldview is. And there is a highly developed tikanga that goes along with this, tikanga way of doing things. One of these things, these tikanga are there to keep things in good relationship with each other. So one of these ways is kanohi ki te kanohi, face to face, or eye to eye, or breath to breath. It's a rendering that kind of really speaks to this beautiful presence to one another, and a kind of equality as well. There's this really great YouTube video of Tame Iti, New Zealand's most lovable rogue, giving a TEDx talk actually in Auckland some time ago. He's talking about mana, but he's using the kanohi ki te kanohi example. He says during one of the treaty claims for Tūhoi, he walked into the hall where they'd set up, and there on the stage, above everybody was this kind of row, this table, long table, and sitting in a row were members from the Crown side, looking down upon Tūhoi. A little bit like how I'm looking down at you guys now. And so he says, well, not having this is not kanohi ki te kanohi. So he goes and he grabs a ladder out, sticks it in the middle, climbs up it, and gives his kōrero from there. Gotta love that guy, eh? So awesome. But there's that equality thing happening. There's a lot of mana in facing somebody kanohi ki te kanohi, and there's a lot of wairua in breath to breath. There's a kind of moment of indwelling when our breath intermingles, the breath of life, the tihe mauri ora kind of flowing between us. I'm going to return to this in a bit, but I just want to press in a little bit more deeply to the ways our inheritance from the merchant, the soldier, and the missionary, and the effect that those ways of relating have on the church today. So as a nation, these modes have determined our economic and our governance structures. It drives ecological and geographical change and responses towards it. And we get further and further away from considering how kaupapa Māori values might suggest a good order of things. We look to economic considerations, so money, and we also look to power. Is this going to lose us access to this beach? Is this going to stop us from walking in the Waitakere Ranges? What else am I going to do on a Sunday? Whā! So, in the Anglican Church at least, these modes have also determined our economic and governance structures. These modes also shape the ways that we relate as three tikanga. So if you want to know why there is dysfunction in our three tikanga church between the three tikanga partners, it's because they operate in these modes. We inherit, and we find it hard to critically examine how the privileging in our church of Pākehā ways of doing, Pākehā ways of seeing things, and we have to say Pākehā theology. And I think where the Anglican Church has attempted to shift away from these ways of thinking and doing things, say, with its radical establishment of the three tikanga structure, the fiscal structures at the top and the accountability structures at the top remain set in place in ways that replicate that colonial moment, that dictate, that privilege money and power and operate out of fear. This is why this is important. So at last year's Morph event, Dr. Joe McGarry talked about the role of theologians. He said that their role was to apply their knowledge, to be deeply rooted in their church and community, and when there is a crisis facing the church, to be ready to step into the chaos. It's a great call for our church and our theologians. He used the image of a steely-eyed theologian, his friend, in fact, internally shook with fear, but utter determination on her face as she faced members of the local white supremacy group. A theologian is somebody who stands between the church and the brokenness and speaks and acts truth to both sides. So what are our areas of chaos in our nation? Maybe poverty, homelessness, high incarceration rates, toxic rivers, diabolically high suicide rates amongst our youth. See, this is why knowing that these stories and knowing these dynamics of relationship, this is why they matter, because this is the flip side of this way of operating. We, the privileged here that sit in this church, get to see the top, the good order of things. It's working for us. This is the flip side. These are the spaces that Māori inhabit. They are overrepresented in all those places. And a true crisis of the church is that many theologians do not know how to step into the gap between the church and the brokenness, because it is also the place between missionary and Māori. The church replicates colonialism and ways of relating that diminish Māori mana. And this is what we have. We need to radically reconfigure the way we do our relationships with each other as a nation. As a church, we need to reorder these things. What if healing from those places of chaos was not us, the church, calling Māori into wellness? For most people in New Zealand, what does that look like? Homelessness, get a job. Poverty, get a job. High incarceration rates. Those guys should have just kept out of mischief with a job. Like, we just keep working towards this economic mode here, right? Just keep looking towards money. What if a part of Christ's call to us was to shift towards Māori conceptualizations of wholeness and right relationship? So atua, whenua, tangata. So deep connectedness, deep rootedness, deep interdependence, and deep grace. I've got 2 suggestions for the church. The first is to exhale. The first is to empty ourselves of our modes of relation that we have inherited from that past moment, but that continues till now. To decolonize our minds, to realize that we need to refigure the order of things. And it's not these guys here that need to change, it is us. The second thing I have to suggest is to breathe in. To breathe in something new. To allow ourselves to be shaped by new influence, to not stand in fear of the unfamiliar, but allow ourselves to be transformed from the familiar to something new. Let's learn karakia and more tiatia. Let's discover the rich ways that God has revealed himself in our culturescapes and in our landscapes. If we are to find reconciliation as a people, we have to start with Christ and his great reordering of things, where the first become last and the last first. This is a place of humility and vulnerability. This is a place of letting go of power and of self, but where what grows instead is aroha and rangimarie. Love and peace. Imagine that prophetic truth being spoken to our homeless. Imagine that as a prophetic truth to our young people who are losing their lives. Imagine that between our 3 tikanga of the Anglican Church. We need to be dreaming out of this space. We need to dream for life and for healing for our nation, starting at this place here. Kanohi ki te kanohi. Face to face, eye to eye, and breath to breath. May Māori and Pākehā be led to share breath deeply with one another, with the whenua, and with our God. Tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa.